Why doesn't London run everything anymore? For centuries, power flowed in one direction, down the Thames, through Whitehall and out into the corners of the realm. But in the late 1990s, something profound shifted. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland were given their own parliaments and assemblies. Why then? Why not before? And what did it mean for Britain's sense of itself? That's our journey today. For most of modern history, Britain ran as a unitary state. Westminster made the laws, the Crown signed them off into being, Whitehall officials carried them out. Local government existed, of course, but sovereignty was always clear. It rested at the centre. Yet beneath the surface, that centralisation was a fragile compromise. The Union itself had been stitched together across centuries. The 1536 Acts of Union with Wales, the 1707 Union with Scotland, the 1801 incorporation of Ireland. Each brought promises, bargains and simmering discontents. Still, through the 19th and most of the 20th centuries, Parliament in London claimed the right to rule the whole island chain. But was that grip ever as firm as it looked? Or were cracks already spreading long before the late 1990s focused the issue? Let's follow the story through Margaret, a civil servant in the Scottish office in Edinburgh in the 1970s. She lived in Scotland, worked for Westminster and yet saw day by day how distant London seemed to her neighbours. They were proud of their identity, proud of their institutions, their own legal systems, their education system, their churches. And yet every policy came stamped with Westminster's seal. She'd attend meetings where colleagues would say, "We know what's best for Scotland, but Whitehall hasn't listened." That frustration wasn't hers alone. It was written across communities. But why didn't anything change then? The answer takes us to the first real test. In the 1970s, the oil boom in the North Sea shifted economics and confidence. Scottish nationalism surged. In 1979, referendums were held in both Scotland and Wales on the question of devolution. Margaret watched the votes with tense anticipation. The Scottish result is almost Shakespearean in its irony. A majority said yes, but Parliament had set a rule that 40% of the entire electorate, not just those who turned out, had to back the change. They didn't reach it. Wales, for its part, voted no by a landslide. So Margaret filed more papers, drafted more memos, and life went on. Or did it? Was the no vote a death knell, or just a delay? Meanwhile, Northern Ireland was telling its own story. Since 1921, Stormont had been given the province a measure of self-rule. But by 1972, as violence escalated in what became known as the Troubles, that Parliament was suspended. Direct rule from Westminster returned. Imagine Margaret visiting Belfast in the early 1980s, meeting officials who lived under constant security checks, a cityscape lined with watchtowers. For them, the idea of a local power wasn't theoretical, it was life or death. Yet peace seemed distant. Could Northern Ireland ever regain its own voice? Back in Britain, Margaret Thatcher's government pressed hard on centralisation. Local councils were squeezed. Scottish and Welsh voices often felt ignored. When Thatcher introduced the poll tax in Scotland a year before England, resentment deepened. For Margaret and her colleagues, the office chatter shifted from weary resignation to indignation. If Westminster wasn't going to listen, perhaps Scots and Welsh would demand something new. And by the mid-1990s, with Labour's Tony Blair promising reform, that demand had found a willing ear. But why did Labour embrace devolution so firmly after resisting it in the 1970s? The answer lies in politics as much as principle. Labour won a landslide victory in 1997, sweeping into power on promises of constitutional reform. Part of that was modernisation, an attempt to reframe Britain for a new century. Part was pragmatic, an effort to answer nationalistic demands before they tore the Union apart. Referendums were called again. This time the mood was different. In Scotland, nearly 3/4 voted in favour, and a majority backed giving the new Parliament tax-raising powers. In Wales the vote was knife-edge close, won by just a few thousand ballots, but it was still a yes. And in Northern Ireland, a parallel process was underway. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 not only ended decades of violence, but restored the principle of a local assembly. Margaret, now close to retirement, looked on with something like awe. For decades, she drafted reports for distant ministers. Now, Edinburgh is about to have its own parliament again for the first time in nearly 300 years. The Scotland Act 1998 created a devolved parliament in Edinburgh. The Government of Wales Act 1998 established an assembly in Cardiff. The Northern Ireland Act of 1998 gave shape to a new power-sharing assembly at Stormont. Margaret's successors moved into new offices. A building site in Holyrood buzzed with cranes. Cardiff prepared its chamber. Belfast's Stormont estate stirred back into life. And with them came profound questions. What should these institutions control? Education, health, transport? And what should Westminster hold back? Defence, foreign affairs, taxation? The settlement wasn't tidy. It was deliberately asymmetric, each nation with different powers. Would that flexibility keep the peace or plant new seeds of discord? By the early 2000s, Britain's map of power had been redrawn. Scotland debated its own laws. Wales shaped its own services. Northern Ireland governed in fits and starts, sometimes suspended, sometimes thriving. But what did that mean for Margaret's generation? The people who'd lived under centralisation all their lives. For some it was a liberation. Finally, decisions are closer to home. For others, it was division. If we all have different rules, what holds us together? And for Westminster, it raised a stark dilemma. If power could flow outwards, could it ever flow back in, or had the centre weakened forever? Devolution was sold as a settlement, a way of keeping Britain together by loosening the bonds. Yet it also exposed just how different the nations of the UK saw themselves. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland each carved out space to express their distinct identities. And Margaret, she retired in 1999, standing outside of the new Scottish Parliament on opening day. She thought of the memos she'd typed, the frustration she'd heard, and smiled at the sound of bagpipes filling the air. For her, it felt like a circle had closed. Not a break from the past, but a recognition that the Union had always been a negotiation. But was it stable? Or was it just the beginning of something larger? Perhaps even the unravelling of the United Kingdom itself. Thanks for walking a little further down the road of history that made Britain. If you liked it, there's a button especially for that. If you subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue for you to enjoy. And if you ding the bell, you'll be informed of every new episode. Maybe something like this one that YouTube's chosen for you. Have a look, I think you'll like it. Until next time, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you very soon.